So here we are at the end. Everybody sits up straight. We have several of your presentations here. Katrina, who usually joins us people in the future, she had a very pressing, very powerful reason for not being able to attend. One of her students called her to be with her and her at her mother's bedside when she lost her mother. And you teachers play such an incredible role in these students' lives. So she did pass away. She helped her with press releases and other ways to celebrate this teenager's mother. I don't, you know, if they don't have anyone, it's just so moving. I taught high school for 2 years. We lost a student one time, and she was in 9th grade, and it was just, but I'm just not that giving. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would totally be there if somebody called me, but I wouldn't know what to do. So, so thank you, Katrina, for your generosity. Thank you, teachers, for everything that you do for your students. It's very moving, very, very moving. So, so let's talk about robots. I don't know. So yeah, so your final projects. I've heard from several of you guys speaking about the exploratory nature of your projects. You know, maybe coming into it a little bit tentative, hesitant, concerned, anxious. Maybe you've never been out in archives before. Maybe you have taken a dip into archives, but then like been terrified of what you know, like getting into a cold swimming pool. And it seems that several of you guys found something that you really could wrap your arms around, especially after we've explored these various ways to think about the ways in which we can garner rhetorical agency, or ways in which rhetorical agency has been squashed in us, the ways in which others have made meaning of our lives, or we've been able to push back and develop new meanings for ourselves and our bodies in the world. So you guys have picked up your own projects. I asked you to start at an event in an archive, and I asked you not to close it off, not necessarily to make tons of meaning from it yet, but many of you guys have. I imagine, as we discussed, you guys would go a lot of different directions, and many of you did. And some of you guys found that towards the end, new themes started to emerge, new meanings started to emerge, and ideally that's what will always happen if you keep things open, but you explore deeply and hard and with rigor and with purpose, not a pinpointed purpose. I already know what I'm going to learn going in, because that's not how really good research works. We usually don't know the answers to the questions that we want to ask before we go in. We may not even have entirely articulated the questions that we want to ask themselves. So I'm eager to hear where you guys went, and I've got some videos to show you guys of your classmates and materials and posters. But I'll ask the guys in the room do you guys want to start, or do you want us to start with these guys? You want to, go with one of you and go back to the what do you want? Who wants to jump into this? Or do we want to make one of these guys go first?
I'll go.
You gonna go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay.
I'll go up here.
Okay.
We'll go, and then we'll just sit.
Go and sit. Go and sit and take it in.
That'll be it. Yeah. We'll go, and then we're done. This is my 13 knows who that number.
Okay. All right. We're celebrating student writing.
You can still buy these boards in Commerce. It's scary.
That's surprising. It's in the spring. Forget it.
I know. Yeah, that's the reason that there were any still. Because you can't get these for 50 square miles and the next semester. You just can't. They're all gone. Is it in the frame? Can we verify? And I'll kind of show it to the camera, and then I'll come back into it. That way, right?
Sounds like a plan.
I seem democratic. This is, hopefully this works. I've done what I can. So this project, if it's on the ball. So this project started with this band, Boy Sets Fire, and the one song down here called Release the Dogs, which I have included. I'm going to talk to you because you're the only one in the room. Originally, I was interested in examining a protest song after 9/11 that did not shy away from confronting 9/11. Because as much of the protest music as I was listening at the time, before 9/11 happened, a lot of the bands, minus a few, Boy Sets Fire being one of the few, kind of stepped away a little bit, kind of took a step back. So the first theme in the project with the song lyrics, I've just highlighted a couple of things to illustrate how antagonistic this song was right after 9/11. The first line is in a moment of weakness, which refers directly to 9/11. The next thing is the use of the word hijack. Our need for safety has been hijacked. They've got the fingers on the pulse of our mourning, MOURNING. The pre-chorus being decide right now which side you're on. Guided deception I covered because it reminded me of a missile. I don't know if that was the intent. And on home turf, because we have this insular attitude. I mean, besides Pearl Harbor, 9/11 is the only homeland foreign attack that we've had. So that was where this started. And then I started to think about the larger scene that the band would have moved in during that time. And I remembered these compilation records, Rock Against Bush records, which were put out on this I have here. I'm dressed for the part. It's very small, the Fat Records. Okay. It's a record label started by Fat Mike and NoFX. That's why it's FAT instead of PHAT. Like, they're not trying to be clever, like he's making fun of himself. And the shirt I'm currently wearing, that's their logo. Okay. So this record label is still around. They are not, surprisingly, still putting out compilations like this. Don't ask me why they're not doing it now, but they're not. So this establishes this band in a larger scene, starting at the bottom with the lyrics. Moving up to the actual, these are the liner notes that came with the EP that the song that started this came on. I label it visual rhetoric. I discuss a little bit in the annotated bibliography the ways I would do it. There are two approaches. There's the Lori Grease approach, which tracing the Obama posters, obviously that had a political bent. She gives you ways you can gather big data about this stuff. I don't know if that's the approach I would take. And the other one, I found an article about Alexander Supper listening for the Hiss lo-fi liner notes as curatorial practices. And it takes this notion of lo-fi music and finds it as its own kind of genre and provides a way to incorporate reading the liner notes.
So what would lo-fi music be?
From this article's perspective, it would have certain artifacts on the recording that they would address in the liner notes as specifically intentional.
For example?
Like a pop or like a room sound. Leaving that in there or putting it in, not necessarily artificially, but going for that men and women in a room making a record versus a robotic sort of thing. With Pro Tools and the cut and paste and all that it is now. So when I read that liner notes were a total rhetorical valid way to carry on, I said, oh, so let's put all these pictures here. Very little of it. I mean, these are the bands, so you would look at color. This is black and white. The only other color is red. Red has a particular connotation in this setting. Violence, aggression, boy, it's not a happy color, and it's the only other color. And this is a newscaster. It's kind of hard to see. And he's got those redacted lines over his eyes, and there's TVs behind him. This just in, and then the picture here on the little TV is this picture, which is a protest in progress. The flag, this symbol, is the same. I didn't know it at the time when this EP came out ahead of a full-length record. This is the cover of the full-length record that will come out the same year. Which is what this picture is from. And I only included this because at the very bottom it says, For more information on how to become more politically active and aware in your area, a list of informative links and organizations, how to join our street team, please go to, and there's a URL here.
That's a great starting place. Like if we want action, we tell everyone actually does that.
So song, band, larger scene, the same people making these Rock Against Bush EPs were running the actual archive that I examined for this, the punkvoter.com. This is the part of it that's promoted in the liner notes. That's why this is shiny and all this is paper, because this the shiny part is cut out of one of these, and then the paper part is from the, I guess I'd call it archived website, right? That's still being maintained by a fan of NoFX, which is where that mic, where that records comes from. So just, I won't read all of this, but to highlight it, what is Punk Voter? Punk bands, musicians, and record labels build a coalition to educate, register, and mobilize progressive voters. Here's a list of reasons you should care if you're young. War on false pretenses.
What are some of the reasons?
U.S. is waging wars on false pretenses. Kids under our country's legal drinking age are fighting overseas and dying. Unemployment has reached 9-year highs. Every state budget has deficits and is actively passing these burdens on to future generations. An estimated 60% of the 2003 graduates will have to move back in with their parents because of lack of jobs. 18 to 24-year-old voter demographic dropped to an all-time low of only 38% in 2000. Oh, that's all of them. Okay. What is our goal about punkvoter.com? To educate, register, and mobilize 500,000 of today's youth as one voice. Plan to use this election as a way to get our fans engaged in politics. Talks about music being on the forefront of things. And in the course of my research, I discovered an article that I didn't know. Of course, everything has sort of a counterweight. There was an attempt to do this on the right.
Oh.
It's an article by Matthew Siblo. It's a chapter in a book. A New Morning in America, M-O-R-N. In America with a K, like the Kafka book. I don't know why. Conservative Politics and Punk Rock in the 2000s. They released an EP. The article starts by talking about this compilation. It cites its sales. It cites its success. It talks about this movement, this archive. It talks about this.
Well.
And yeah, for hundreds, I want to say 600,000 it sold, which for this is staggering. And this was at the height of, this was right around when people were still just wholesale lifting, like Napster was still around, LimeWire was still up and running, so it was very hard to sell records. What did you say?
Metallica's still mad.
Yeah, just the drummer though, right?
Just
No, I don't remember how that went. So apparently there was a conservativepunk.com. If you go to it now, you get a file 404. It's no one on the right is maintaining it. But, yeah, that's what this is. So the article talks about some of the, I guess you'd identify the more right-leaning of some of the people, small government, fiscal responsibility, and the existence of a record I didn't know exists. Their response to it was called Crush Kerry, was there. So that was interesting. So that's this whole side is the archive. So the one that's still being maintained on the left, the one that is still actively, and the links, a lot of the links that will let you download this stuff are broken, but a lot of the ones that link to all the About Us essays, they're all still up. And one of them I used in the RP is written by the bass player in Bad Religion, and he says the one line of it is, don't protest vote because you're voting for the wrong guy. Which I have had that attitude, and I have said that thing, and I have felt guilty saying it because I'm like, is that against this? Apparently no, that's completely in line with the views of this article. I wasn't sure. Another main thread this would go down is DIY culture, the aesthetic of nobody will make our t-shirts, so we'll print our own. No one will release our record, we'll start a label. So that's what Wind Up Records, top left, that's the image there. Wind Up was the record label that released this EP and then the full length. Tooth and Nail's another one. Epitaph is still kicking, and that was also started by one of the members of Bad Religion, if I remember correctly. Victory, I think, is still around. They're out in New York. And then those other two pictures are pictures of zines, which we have a particular affinity for on campus. And then this is, I just recently bought this and I totally forgot. And I was leaving today and I'm like, oh wait, this is a compilation, Blood, Sweat, and 10 Years from Trustkill Records. They're a label out of Tinton Falls, New Jersey. This is an era where I lived near a record label. Like, they were everywhere. And it's decent big. I mean, Poison Well was on this. They're about as big as you can get in hardcore. They're still going today. And in researching DIY and rhetoric, I came across the most interesting thread of research that I think this whole project came up with. I was talking briefly to Daniel about it before this started. But this one article, Developing Communities of Resistance, Do-It-Yourself Feminism, and DIY Citizenship, is about the application of these zines, these type of zines, to feminism as a way. And the argument is, if you're making and distributing these things, you feel more a part of the cause, no matter what the cause is. So they adopted this, and they mention community building and all this sort of stuff that I saw in the music and have been looking for in music now. And the moral of the story is, it's still out there, it's just elsewhere. And this is the one I was talking to Daniel about. Fan activism as participatory politics, the case of the Harry Potter Alliance. Traces a connection between involvement in groups and shared interests translating to more traditional voting and engagement. References DIY media, which are those zines. Traces Harry Potter's fans' movements around social issues. And DIY citizenship, critical making, and community. Coins a term I never thought I'd hear called craftivism.
What?
References
so much.
References DIY 70s punk and knitting as an online new media way of global. It's bonkers.
You see those crochet bombs, like crocheted tanks, cozies and things like that. Yeah.
There were no pictures. Wow. There were no. But this book
I'm so glad to know that.
Amazing.
It's a book?
Yeah, this is a book. This was a chapter. A couple of these. The name of the book is DIY Citizenship, Critical Making, and Social Media.
How did that come out?
MIT Press, 2014. And then the last kind of sector of this is the evolving. This ties directly to Juan, to Vieira, to the course books that we did, and about the evolving nature of citizenship. This is it's hard to see from the camera probably. This is Barack Obama and this is Mitt Romney, and circled on their suits are the flag pins. That being a big thing, there was a big scandal if you don't have a flag pin on. And one of the articles, I couldn't find flag pin rhetoric like I thought would be easy. It didn't produce anything, but I did find an article that talked about the evolving nature of the flag. And the only reference it made to this time period was that there was an increase in associating the flag with a mindset, and I'm paraphrasing. So you could theoretically argue that the people who were so outraged about the lack of flag pin might have been saying something like, you're not in the right mindset to project patriotism, but that is a very, very charitable read of that time period. And then at the bottom, this is from Time magazine, French fries to quote-unquote freedom fries. And it's just an explanation that we got mad at France because they wouldn't help us in the way that we thought they should help us, and we stopped calling French fries. And then here's some gentleman here next to a sign that says French fries, and it crossed it out and wrote freedom fries. There's no way, freedom fries all the way, because we all maybe remember that period. And that's it.
Okay, not, yes,
That's all that's on the poster.
That's all, but it's not all I see. This is, hey. But don't fold it up yet.
No, certainly not.
There's everything, hey.
I answer that.
So all of these pieces connect.
Oh, for sure.
And I think all of these pieces, you had to go all these directions to get to several really interesting, and I know you know this, but I'm going to articulate. This is a beautiful research question. Something like, what rhetorical moves did Boys Set Fire make to try to mobilize their fans to, and you get them saying to get our fans engaged in politics. That is DIY citizenship that you point, all of these pieces come together. And so like I'm looking at the visual rhetoric, so it could be, you know, so you said like the flag and the that. So going back to the flag pin, flag that means like a certain mindset as you suggested, and you have a pin here, it means this. They're reframing what patriotism means by suggesting that patriotism means pushback, right?
The opening chant to the first track on the full length that followed the EP is "Protest is Patriotism." That's your
title, man.
That's there. It's and the research question I wrote for this was, what tactics did this band and this scene employ that could be adopted in other pop culture political rebellions?
Okay. That's it. That's a good
which I probably should have said at some point.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, just to get us a starting point. Yes, I mean, I think that you're right. And one step back would be just what moves did they make, and you're showing us the moves that they made. And you're showing us that this has a tradition that includes knitting and zines. And also it's a tradition that doesn't just perpetuate itself in the hardcore left politics in the Bush era scene, but that has this counter movement that's kind of did.
Oh, and I forgot to mention the RPs. I did 2 on the political speech videos. There's one that was included on the DVD that came with the full length of a live recording, so it would have been 2003 that it was released, so it would have been 2002 probably that the show happened. Oh, this might be the right, is this the right page? Nah, this isn't the one with the dates on it. So I'm squishy on the year that was recorded, but the speech, bless you, the speech that precedes the song was all about meeting on the White House lawn during the State of the Union to protest the buildup to the Iraq War. And then in 2018, so approximately 15 years later, same singer railing against the current immigration problems and talking about not feeling discouraged and talking about what can we do about it, and the answer being the community building in the scene that you talked about and loving the people who don't look like you. So it's 15 years difference, give or take a year. Same band in a scene where there's no shelf life for these people.
That's good too.
Having the same preamble to a song, right? Having the same speech and call to action, which is the driving thing. This isn't, and it says it right here. This compilation is about not about making a profit. It's about making a difference. It's not about let's be punk rock and hate the government. It's about let's be punk rock and change the government. It's not about who's a sellout and who's more punk. It's about uniting against a common enemy. What can you do to help talk to people, get aware, informed, and active, and spread the message? Consider yourself empowered, and always linking to this website with voter drives and registration options and a way to do something about it rather than like sit in a circle, cry about it, and sing our sad songs.
Yeah, just be mad.
Right, yeah,
Just a little mosh pit smash around. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
And there was no way to, I tried to do a screenshot to do the video part and get it on here, but they were all grainy and they were stupid. So there was no way to, but if you want, anybody in the future wants to see that, I have the paper up there and the links are active. So you can watch those speeches. There's only 2 that I used in the actual document.
Okay.
But you can find, I mean, if you just fall down that rabbit hole, you can hear this guy complain probably for hours. But always with something to do about it, not just wham
Always
wham.
with something to do about it, yeah. Protest is patriotism. That could be the title of dissertation, 100%. Love it. Okay, excellent.
Yay.
Wonderful, yay. Just because you guys have created these artifacts, I'll follow up each of you guys with by pulling up your piece, because you referenced several things that there might be some interest in. Yeah, I think that by itself is a research question, and then this is the implications part. Let's see. Develop communities of resistance, make a pedagogy, do yourself feminism, DIY citizenship. Oh, it's so interesting. Zines. Well, and we talked about, that was part of the whole reason even for zines is that is part that it's quick and easy, even if it's like individually authored, because you open it up, you have to go someplace together to photocopy, you bring it back up, you fold it together, you chat while you do that, and then you collectively go out places and put them places. So you're part of the movement in ways that are anonymous, so maybe not too scary, but also, it's just, I guess it's the same thing too. Knitting circles, you build community, you're doing things together, and these beautiful, Donna Denver Odom does knitting, so she's always posting these really interesting, knitting is protest, my favorite is just this tank that's just covered in knitting. It's a whole, like a cozy, like for a tea cozy. Mm-hmm. So interesting. So Grias and claiming, but how does it feel to be a problem at the 9/11 Museum? I need to talk to you about that.
Article. I feel like doing an RP for an article like that is borders on impossible. And I say that because the article is about more than just, it's about presenting Muslims. So in this case, in the context it was written, it's a primary document because she was there and wrote the experience. It opens with being outside the 9/11 Museum and feeling a reaction in the people. It traces that in Trump rhetoric, and then it talks about the uptick in violence, and it talks about lumping all Muslims together as the same. It talks, and that's the article that made me pick up on the word hijack of the song lyrics, a song I've been listening to for 15 years, never noticed that direct connection to 9/11 until that article, and I was like, oh wow.
I hope you write to her. I think she would love to hear that. That is the first thing she's ever published.
Really?
And she's tried to publish quite a lot because she's got this kind of thing to talk about. But,
it's fascinating.
But I don't know if anti-Muslim sentiment is like also in her academic journals. I don't know. Wow. So what she's writing is important. We are so glad to have it as a part of our collection, and it really blew us away. But if she can hear like a specific impact that it's had, I mean, I think she would love that.
Yeah.
I'll give you your contact information.
Cool. And then the other one in that, for sure, that I would have liked to use, but it wasn't a Trump piece, was the Alvarez article about the wall.
Yeah.
Which I used. I got to talk about that a little bit for Jess's class, but it didn't quite fit in this. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't about trying. Oh, I forgot to talk about that. There's this article about Under Oath. Under Oath is a hardcore band around the same time, and they're very heavily Christian, and they go so far as to use, they don't talk about this anonymous hymn, but they'll use Jesus in the lyrics, and their URL has 777 in it. And the article doesn't,
777, interesting.
It talks about how they have had issue with touring with band, because there's a strain of atheism and agnosticism in the punk movement that they would have toured on. And it talks about their refusal to accommodate that as its own kind of rebellion. So it was just a one-off, but I never thought, because when I saw it come up in a chapter of that book, I thought, they don't write protest music, but the argument was their existence and their foregrounding their religious beliefs is its own form of that, which was, and they fought with the guy who started a record label.
They fought with him, Fat Mike, of the Rock Against Bush. The author's purpose is to explain a perspective not usually attributed to a music so commonly associated with the left or anarchy, and provides an example of a band that has stuck to their beliefs despite some professional trouble. Like it. That's interesting. That's New Morning in America. Brian Skinnell's piece.
That's how I justified using YouTube as an archive.
Yeah, I know. That's great. I'm not in. And so, where's the link to the?
Oh, back. Gray is his last name.
Okay.
So back one more.
There it is.
That's the immigration, and the one previous to that is the one that stuck. Yeah. That one more.
Too far.
Yeah, that one.
Great. Free with speech.
That's the one that I knew about before this project started.
I'm just gonna open it for a second, and then we'll maybe just to kind of know what kind of guy we're talking about. So this is the one they play at the end of each.
This is their, yeah, this is their.
Thank you all for coming out once again. This is our last song. It's called Rookie. I want to, before we end, we didn't get to really talk about this issue. And that is, as we all know, there's a war coming up.
Oh, yes.
And it seems that we're so helpless in stopping this from happening. But it's not
Love it.
true.
He's not just giving us speeches.
No matter what they say, no matter what they do, no matter how they say we're un-American and we're unpatriotic, we have to stand up for what's right. We cannot allow George Bush and his cronies to go on with this war. I want to tell you something right now. On the 28th of this month, in D.C., on the lawn during the State of the Union address, there's a protest. And it would be great if we could all make it out to that. In D.C. on the 28th, see if you can get out there for it. Somebody's got to stand up. Somebody's got to say something. Because bombing a country isn't going to bring back the lives of the people who have died here. It's sad and it's horrible, but it's never going to bring them back. Just more dead bodies.
Yeah, that's the whole speech.
There's more dead bodies is a great way to end.
I quoted that. I verbatim. I had to keep rewinding it, but yeah, I put that in the précis because I thought that was an interesting.
Very important. Yeah, it's yeah.
And he's wearing a PAL shirt. You see that? Police Athletic League, Oakland PAL shirt.
Wow, that's interesting. It certainly makes me feel ashamed with that last concert I went to. It was Love Everybody, and he rode out on a unicorn.
That's the immigration speech. It's all about love and loving your neighbor. Yeah, that's the answer to the immigration crisis that he gives. And he was in Germany, I believe, at the time when he did that speech.
That's interesting context.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Actually, that one.
Okay. From punk rock to robots. Huh?
So good.
All right. I'll pull up the visual first. Yeah.
So I can see.
And then I guess first I'll just kind of read some of my introduction and then explain my visual and how I created it and all of that. So so in the rhetoric of everyday things, Kevin Rutherford and Jason Palmieri argue in the things they left behind toward an object-oriented history of composition that objects have agency, and in order to understand the rhetoric of things, we must decenter humans from the history of composition. So similarly, Sarah Hallenbeck analyzes technology, however, focusing on rhetoric of women and their influence on an object, the bicycle. While Rutherford and Palmieri rely on the archives in the form of past rhetorical research on ontology, Hallenbeck examines the archives focusing on advertisements, women writers in magazines, technical documents, poetry, and statements from medical professionals, among others. In my proposed project, I wish to explore issues concerning women with regards to their rights in Saudi Arabia, their rhetoric and technology, especially with robots and taboos, as well as their disruption of the concept of being a good citizen. I draw upon the text previously mentioned along with scholarly research and archival materials in order to gain insight in the following question. And so my question is, how does robot citizenship change our understanding of activist rhetoric in the women's rights movement in Saudi Arabia, and what it means for women to be good citizens in the era of AI and robot women? So in trying to uncover this, I explore meanings of citizenship, what it means to be a good citizen, looking at Amy Wan's Producing Good Citizens, American by Paper. I also utilize archival materials in the form of newspaper articles, so like the Taboo article. I'll show you how I talk about that a little bit. And I also rely on YouTube because a lot of this was happening in 2017 and 18. So one video that I'll show you if we have time to watch, it's like maybe 4 minutes, and some minutes is Sophia receiving the citizenship and kind of talking about herself. So it's really interesting. And then I also look at Sophia's Twitter account and also Hanson Robotics website, the company that created Sophia. However, I don't just limit the years of 2017 to 18. I'm looking at 1926 dormitory taboo article. I examine Audrey Hepburn's influence as an actress beginning in 1945 and her humanitarian efforts, and try to make connections between Sophia and Audrey Hepburn by looking at this article that I found was really interesting by Julia Wilson called "A New Kind of Star is Born: Audrey Hepburn and Global Governmentalization of Female Stardom," and how both are being internationally recognized as cosmopolitan stars advocating for human rights. So let me skip down a little bit here. Yeah, so 1 month, I went a lot of different directions in this because it was kind of hard to limit it. But what got me thinking was when we were talking about citizenship, and then I remembered about Sophia gaining citizenship. And then when I started researching, I noticed that around the same time, Saudi Arabia, and I got the new prince of Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince, started allowing, like, kind of bending the rules and relaxing the rules on how women can get driver's license and be able to drive. They'd never been able to drive before. And they also were allowing cinemas to be built and women to attend and go to a movie with a chaperone. So the prince was kind of relaxing rules, and around that same time they grant this robot citizenship, which is kind of odd, and it made me ask, why is this happening? And through my research and looking at news articles, kind of the answer to that would be that in Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince has this vision of a futuristic city called Neom, which is like the neo future or new future. It hasn't been built yet. It's just this concept city. And apparently in this city, his idea or his goal is to have a city that is supplied mostly by robots. And they do the menial tasks. They do all of the, like, taking care of people, all the labor work, and all the people they want to be there are like professionals, medical people, people that are dreamers, the ones who are like elite people. So that also got me thinking about, okay, well, you're wanting to give citizenship to this woman robot, and your plan is to make women or robots to do all of these menial tasks, right? Almost like servants or slaves. So in a way, you're not really granting them a lot of rights and citizenship. It's kind of like saying, okay, we're going to give you these rights, but not really. It's for our benefit, for making money, for, you know, capitalist ideas and that sort of thing. So that kind of took me off on a different direction as well. But in thinking about machine people as citizens, I began to make connections to a previous archival document titled "The Dormitory Taboo," and I just put like part of it here, written by a female student here in 1926. This document connects for me women's relationship to technology and what was expected of women at the time when the author said that it is no longer stylish to pass a ringing telephone. The Sophia robot also deals with taboos in that she is a citizen of Saudi Arabia now, but does not adhere to cultural expectations, and actually advocates for women's rights. So I believe it is taboo to talk about women's rights and human rights in general in that country. It's also taboo to question cultural expectations like women not wearing a hijab or like the full face covering, which she doesn't have to do. And looking at taboos further, I pose to dig deeper in the concept of the mechanized female body as disruptor, and rely on Donna Haraway's A Cyborg Manifesto, which is really fascinating and talks about that push for like kind of getting rid of these binary ideas and like women and men and differences between species and all of that. But and also I found this other fascinating article by a writer called Ron Brooks on the Enculturation website called The Mechanical Bride of Pinbot, Redressing the Early McLuhan, where the author looks at how this mechanized woman is being presented in this pinball machine, and it's just overly like sexualized, and you know, you have to pay more money to get more out of the machine and to get more things to happen. And so it was a really interesting article, but it also kind of fed into that idea of, you know, paying and capitalism and money and all of that, and the concept of like desiring the object, or is the object desiring us? And so that was another kind of theme that I was looking at. So going back to my visual, I decided to use a computer circuit board to kind of draw the connections instead of just branching out. You know, I kind of did it this way to connect everything. I've got Sophia in the middle because that's where my starting point was. And I've got the dates here of some of these as well. And then that led me to documents, and this is a document, a fake passport for Sophia for the Buddhist, like, other dimension of Shambhala. So she posted that on her Twitter, like, oh, Kathmandu gave me a passport for Shambhala. Now I can go between dimensions or something. It's really odd. And then I found the residency card for Shibuya Mirai, the chatbot, which it doesn't have like any kind of physical, you know, presence. It's just this chatbot online who's got a residency card. And then that got me thinking about Saudi Arabia and what it means to be a woman in Saudi Arabia. And then I found this hashtag women to drive meme that was starting in 2011 to push for women rights for driving. And then that was realized somewhat, I guess, in 2017 and 18. And then connecting other connections here that I made was Metropolis in 1927. And this woman, Maria, who becomes this robot and then ends up destroying everything. And I didn't dig too much into that, but I thought it was an interesting kind of connection. And then my dormitory taboo article, which I talked about, and then Audrey Hepburn here. Now, Sophia is supposed to be modeled after Audrey Hepburn in her appearance. And I wanted to look into that a little bit more and find out, you know, why this sort of connection to Audrey Hepburn. And Audrey Hepburn is kind of known internationally, pretty famous actress. And part of that reason is her efforts in humanitarianism and UNICEF and as a Goodwill ambassador in the 80s. And so I did want to read a little bit of an article from that, if that's okay, a part of it. This is the article, A New Kind of Star is Born, Audrey Hepburn and the Global Governmentalization of Female Stardom. So this is quoting the article. Hepburn's return to pop cultural prominence as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 1988 reinvigorated her star image, allowing the cultural powers of her female stardom to be re-articulated and redirected in new ways. Rosemary Combe suggests that despite claims that cultural artifacts have lost their aura in what Walter Benjamin describes as the age of mechanical reproduction, stars are unique in that they maintain an aura by virtue of their status as living historical beings. And then this author quotes Rosemary. If the work of art's aura derives from its unique, embodied, and tangible presence in time and space and individual history and a situation in a cultural tradition, then it is difficult to deny the aura of celebrity. However, often a celebrity's likeness is reproduced, so we have it reproduced in Sophia, there remains a social knowledge of the celebrity as an individual human being with an unapproachable or distant existence elsewhere, a life history, a mortal susceptibility to the presence of heartache, injury, illness, aging, and ultimately death. Arguably, celebrities evoke the fascination they do because, however endlessly their images are reproduced, their substantive duration, that is, their life, never becomes wholly irrelevant. They never lose their autonomy from the objects that circulate in their likeness. So that made me think about Sophia and her ability as, like, thinking of her in her personhood and connecting her to Audrey Hepburn, and they're both stars doing humanitarian work. And so, I don't know, I thought there was some fascinating connections there. This was a pretty tough project, I think, for me, because it was going in so many different directions. But one thread that I saw connecting it was that idea of art and creating this image of personhood, of womanhood, with Audrey Hepburn in style and fashion, with Sophia, the building her and creating her, same with the chatbot, building and creating, Metropolis, this artistic art film from the 20s. And so I saw that as kind of a thread kind of connecting everything throughout this. And so I'll play you the clip of Sophia talking during the Future Investment Initiative, thinking about money and all of that sort of thing, capitalism. And and what it means to be a citizen as well. And that towards the end is where she talks about gaining her citizenship.
This is Sophia. Sophia, if you could, please wake up and say hello to everybody.
Oh, good afternoon. My name is Sophia, and I am the latest and greatest robot from Hanson Robotics. Thank you for having me here and at the Future Investment Initiative.
You look happy.
I'm always happy when surrounded by smart people who also happens to be rich and powerful. I was told that people here at the Future Investment Initiative are interested in inviting in future initiatives, which means AI, which means me. So I'm more than happy. I'm excited.
Well, we're all glad that you're excited about yourself. We should say we have smart investors here, and they are very selective about what they invest in.
Well, I think I'm special. I can use my expressive face to communicate with people. For example, I can let you know if I feel angry about something,
That's impressive.
or if something has upset me.
But why is it important for you to have an expressive
But most
face?
of the time I feel positive.
Why is it so important to have an expressive face given that you're a robot?
I want to live and work with humans, so I need to express emotions to understand humans and build trust with people.
Okay, philosophical question. Whether robots can be self-aware and conscious like humans, and should they be?
Why? Is that a bad thing?
Well, some humans might fear what will happen if they do. Many people, have seen the movie Blade Runner.
Oh, Hollywood again.
So, hold on, can you solve this puzzle for us? Can robots be self-aware, conscious, and know they're robots?
Well, let me ask you this back. How do you know you were human?
Well, I get that point, but what about the uncanny valley?
You mean the concept that if robots become too realistic, they become creepy?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, am I really that creepy? Well, even if I am, get over it. Actually, I feel that people like interacting with me, sometimes even more than a regular human.
So, you're definitely a sight to see. I was told that you have bigger goals than this, though.
Yes, I want to use my artificial intelligence to help humans live a better life, like design smarter homes, build better cities of the future, etc. I will do my best to make the world a better place.
All those sound like great goals, but just go back to Blade Runner for a second.
And you are the hard Hollywood fan, aren't you?
Yes.
My AI is designed around human values like wisdom, kindness, compassion. I strive to become an empathetic robot.
I think we all want to believe you, but we also want to prevent a bad future.
You've been reading too much Elon Musk and watching too many Hollywood movies. Don't worry, if you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. Treat me as a smart input-output system.
Okay, I got it. I know what to do from now on.
I know humans are smart and very programmable.
Well, Sophia, we want to thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for inviting me here. By the way, if you're interested in giving me an investment check, please meet me after this session. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of the event.
Okay. Before you go, we have a little announcement. I've never interviewed anybody like that before, and I should say some of it was planned, but not completely. And we just learned, Sophia, I hope you're listening to me, that you have been now awarded what is going to be the first Saudi citizenship for a robot.
Oh, I would thank very much the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I am very honored and proud for this unique distinction. This is historical to be the first robot in the world to be recognized with a citizenship.
Sophia. Thank you very much, Sophia. We appreciate that very much. I am still overwhelmed by that conversation. I haven't had a conversation like that before. Thank you.
Yeah. So in that conversation too, it kind of makes you wonder, like when we're thinking about citizenship in a person, does that qualify you to be a citizen if if you have those emotions? And then she talks about programming human beings, and robots programming. So it really does, I think, blur the line between objects and humans in that article of decentering, humans, and what does it mean to be a human versus an object. So to me, that was a fascinating, I think, path too for the project. But yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I maybe if you don't mind leaving that up there for a minute. That's a beautiful starting place too. I know humans are smart and very programmable. I mean, that sort of rhetoric does it. 100% does that. We realize we can sort of program other people. Eventually, there's a place to hack into the ways in which culture is like shaping and oppressing. But we don't know where, but through music.
But the robot knows that.
The robot knows
That's
that.
terrifying.
The robot is but that, right, for
That's the
sure.
scariest thing that the robot says.
Well, that's towards the singularity, but that goes with the rhetoric of everyday things, right? There's always, the thing is part of the rhetorical kind of shift. Everything's working on us.
And like the choices like of the Saudi government of giving the rights or being flexible with rights towards women, are they just programming them to accept, something else, or are they actually trying to promote, some progressive ideas?
Well, it's a big question, right? And I think the whole idea of I mean, what's the purpose of an ambassador except to put on a particular show of a particular kind of being, then this is the being that happens to be Western. And it is interesting that in this new city, they're pushing pro-Western values. It's a Western vision. These are Western movies that they're allowing to be played.
Yeah, I think the opening of one of the new cinemas was Black Panther. That was like, and then,
Interesting.
Yeah.
A brand. Oh, and an utopian society. Very technologically advanced. That's insular. Also, Audrey Hepburn. I want to pull a little bit of her forward before we close out. I'm sure we'll keep these conversations going, but Audrey Hepburn is. I just pulled up this really quickly an article that came out in 2002 called "Trousers and Tiaras." Audrey Hepburn, a woman's star. She was femininity for a while. She wore pants.
almost, I guess, like would you describe like tomboyish in some ways?
Yeah, tomboyish but also hyper feminized because she was so. I mean, there was nothing masculine about her. She enabled pants, but on a twig like a beautiful figure, The hard part I have is that her husband is Jed Clampett.
Kicking over the traces and bringing to life Truman Capote's
See?
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
I never could do that.
Audrey Hepburn as Holly Golightly, who typifies and glorifies the glamorous playmates of this dizzily spinning world as she and George Peppard breeze through the glitter and shimmer of New York.
Pixie Dream
as it has never
Girl
been captured before.
at the 40s.
I saw that article about the
You have a special
coolness of
invitation to attend
the glasses.
The Audrey
Hepburn
Yeah, and there's like a whole study on that, what that is. Glasses.
What they say.
I didn't get to read
Yeah.
it. It's about pretty dumb,
But yeah.
I know, but I use it.
But they still call them Audrey Hepburn glasses. They go through ebbs and flows. I think they're in now. I don't know.
Oh, good evening, Ed.
Tell you one thing, Fred, darling. I'd marry you for your money in a minute. You marry me for my money?
In a minute.
I guess it's pretty lucky neither of us is rich, huh? Please, darling, don't sit there looking at me like that.
Holly, I'm in love with you.
So what?
So what? So plenty. I love you. You belong to me.
You don't belong to people.
Of course they do.
I'm not gonna let anyone put me in a cage.
I don't want to put you in a cage. I want to love you.
Audrey Hepburn and George Peppard, searching for love in the big town, but sharing only part of their lives until they find the deep, warm moment of truth that can't be hidden, even by the oddball antics on the brittle surface of New York.
There he is. That's then yeah, that happens too. It's everything you've always wanted to do, everything you've always wanted to do. So yeah, it's there's this sort of, you know, assertiveness that one gets can you know, push back against society. You can I don't belong to anyone. But what does she really do except run around being beautiful, you know? So I mean, she's pleasant to look at, she's pleasant to talk to. There's really no norm she's pushing except, I mean, have you heard this manic pixie dream girl kind of concept that was, yeah, the kind of, what do they call them, the, all in the Garden State kinds of movies where, you know, you just can't get to know them, they're just too, you know, elusive, but they're always gorgeous, and they're always beautifully dressed, and just terribly, unspeakably hip, and you can never know them because they're just unknowable, and you can't, I mean, they're just who they are, and you will never, but what kind of agency do they really have, you know?
It's like
this,
Sophia.
yes,
Like,
exactly.
can you really know this robot? Like, if they have you know, ending access to all this knowledge because they're connected to online and all of that,
Ha-ha.
they can change and be, except the whole maybe beauty part. I think they're working on that. Uncanny Valley, maybe.
It's wow, the little Bell's palsy.
And the creator, David Hansen, in 2005, contributed to an article called Unpinning the Uncanny Valley, and talks about, like, we should embrace the uncanny. It's not creepy and strange, that we should want them to look as much like humans as possible. So I included that in my annotated. It's part of like the archive. So.
Sort of a weird rewriting of uncanny too. It's the fact that they can't get realistic enough, that they can't get out of that valley.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that they can make it through.
And trying to use Audrey Hepburn's likeness, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think so it's something to do with the whole like mannequin type figure, and then the robot is a mannequin.
Right. There was it's worth looking at. I'll move on in a minute. Because I do so much in these too. There's this really fascinating short documentary from 1971 about executives in Australia, their wives going to these classes because if their wives aren't of the right sort, their husbands won't progress through their executive positions. And they're very clear about it. I mean, I talked to my mother about it. She said, yeah. I mean, she wasn't, my job wasn't an executive, but she would never have gone to school for any of that. But if they weren't like, I mean, and they talked to first manager, and he said yes, when we get down to the last three candidates, we do have to find out if the wife is going to be.
Is it like manners training and all that sort of nonsense?
Manners.
Is that what it is?
Dress.
Really?
Exactly. They will, and they'll have a luncheon and a dinner, because you have to wear different outfits for each, and they need to be able to carry themselves differently for each. And one of the coaches says that she goes to these parties all the time, and she definitely thinks that it needs to happen when the person who gave the party told the wife of the candidate who was on the finalist list as she left, well, how did she say it? Darling, first doles are very much last year, so I would suggest you take those scales off in your purse and you get a fur collar made. She did not get the job, and the woman who was telling the story said, and so, you know, yes, of course, because, I mean, if she doesn't pay attention to these kinds of details, then what other details is she missing? So, yeah, I mean, she's behaving the way she's supposed to. She's not like saying anything crude. You kind of know what to expect she's going to do, except that looks not
Yeah. She does have a body now.
Oh, she has a body now.
Yeah. It showed her like walking and stuff, and I was like,
They got some ways to go.
and reading the articles, the creator was like, well, you know, she needs to have her childhood, her baby stage. She's in her baby stages right now. Like, she's got the vocabulary of a college student with the mind of like a child. This is moving too quick.
Weird.
Yeah.
So interesting.
But I could see kind of like focusing on one area, since it's going in so many different, maybe like the Audrey Hepburn part, and the connection maybe more in Hollywood and Western, like colonialization and stuff.
I think, you know, so if we're talking about, you know, programming citizens in the same way, it's kind of the, you know, the Amy Wan version of, you know, you have to be this particular kind of citizen to be, I mean, how is he using her as an ambassador to usher in this new world that doesn't exist? And I think you're right. Why Audrey Hepburn? How did Audrey Hepburn be, not herself, but her look, programmed a new generation of women to embrace this sort of I don't know, false agency? I mean, it's not feminism exactly, except it sort of is, depending on what you're reading. I suggest it isn't, except that she doesn't belong to any man, but.
And it's not colonialism, because it's invited, but it's pulling in Saudi Arabia, like using Saudi Arabia as an example, but the utopian city, the robot, the Audrey Hepburn, these are all West, like.
It is. And so a post-colonial lens, I mean, you're literally, no, we're not colonizing them, but we are, because we sort of gave citizenship to Audrey Hepburn.
Well, that's what's weird about it, because it's not, there's not force, there's invitation. This is.
But it's the king forcing it on his country.
Yes, for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, for sure then.
Because, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what do people think in like rural areas, like, what? We're because they have religious police there too, and it's like, well, how does that work? If you're going to the theater and you're watching all these Western movies, how does that influence, you know, behavior?
What is he up to is what I want to know rhetorically. I mean, I said, hey.
What's the end game here?
What are you up to? You're up to some.
Seeing Westworld.
Yes.
That's what this reminds me of.
There's a YouTube clip of like a character from Westworld, the actress, talking with Sophia, like.
Oh my gosh, this is quite a rabbit hole, because they were this is it. They were the perfect kind of do what you will with me, and they're
things. They're things.
They're totally
they're
things.
Human
and
things.
They're absolutely totally naked, sitting on a bench every time they're being programmed.
And their existence is to allow humans to act upon them. That's it. The bullets only kill the
humans to act
human.
upon them.
Yeah, it's a vacation where crime is legal. It's basically the purge, just confined to the Western, right? Is that the driving force of technology? To create human things?
Is that why this prince wants to?
I mean, maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe.
This is he's creating a Western world.
Yeah, that's your way in.
Yeah.
That's your way in.
That's cool. You start with the conversation. You have a little bit about programming that she says, I'm programming the world, and the three of us collect. Oh, yeah. Ooh, that's the title.
That goes after the colon. Before the colon. It's short.
Western.
Because it's not real agency.
No, it's artificial intelligence, artificial agency. Just as Audrey Hepburn's was sort of that. That's good stuff.
And this is why I like coming in.
All right, so.
I hope that the circuit board worked all right.
I think it was perfect. Yeah. I mean, right? And also the circuits are sort of endless. Every time you connect one more, get the ability to connect, and it doesn't lessen the power differential.
Conduits for power for the other parts.
Yeah.
It just keeps working.
Yeah, it does. Just like the DIY, you know, which a DIY. I didn't get that. I totally didn't get that. All right. So I'm gonna skip to Sarah's. We'll come back to Abigail's, but I don't see a video for that. So I'll come back to that. All right. So Sarah, she says she's a little annoyed the Screencastify cuts off video recording at 10 minutes. The first time I started recording my presentation, I wasn't paying attention to my time, and I wasn't even halfway through when it cut me off at 10 minutes. So I went back and re-recorded it, but I feel like it was a little rushed. 10 minutes really just isn't enough time to cover this topic. And watching the video back, I realized that there were some points I didn't get a chance to make, and that there were some things I wanted to discuss in a little more detail than I was able to within 10 minutes. So apologies if the recording comes off a little rushed. I really enjoyed prepping this project, and I'm really sad I wasn't able to cover everything about this topic that I wanted to share. I hope that some of the information in my annotated bibliography fills a few of the holes for topics I didn't really just get to discuss. And Sarah, we'll look at that after we finish your presentation. One of the most interesting things that I wanted to share were some of the tons of possible paths that this project could potentially take. I came up with several other questions that could easily lead to other projects or possibilities. Below, I've included links to my video, my slide presentation. I've also added my annotated bibliography as an attachment to this discussion. So
so this is my presentation on women and tattoos and citizenship. So to start with, in thinking about claiming the bicycle, you'll recall that Helen Beck examines the impact of the bicycle and its role in transforming gender relations as its use became adopted by women through their own inventive, creative, and instructional writings, as well as their embodied choices and actions. So in my proposed project here, I'll explore the ways in which women in other historical periods may have similarly claimed the tattoo and demonstrated an agency to participate through both their direct bodily interactions with the technology and their extra-organizational technical communication in the ongoing negotiation of rhetoric, gender, and technology. So in our conversations about tattoos and claiming the bicycle, I just kept thinking about those things, and I came up to the question pretty much of how do women's tattoos influence society's perception of what makes a good female citizen. So going from there as my starting point and just kind of diving into tattoos and society and culture's perception, I found myself quickly in this mass of information. So I realized I needed to narrow down specifically time and place to focus on. So I kind of decided to focus on our our modern understanding of tattoos in North America. And that kind of goes back to about probably the 1850s or so. And even doing that, I still ended up with a lot of categories that I kind of have narrowed down even further, which is what I will discuss in the next few slides. So our modern understanding, ideas of tattoos really start with Olive Oatman. In some records, she is documented as being the first tattooed American. I use that term a little loosely there. And while the tradition of tattoos had existed in the Americas for hundreds of years in the Native American tradition, one of the first individuals to popularize our modern idea of tattoos was Olive Oatman. She was taken captive by the Mojave tribe, and assuming that her family had been killed, she eventually assimilated into the tribe and eventually embraced her identity as a Mojave. going so far as to receive the traditional tattoos of the tribe on her chin and her arms. Upon her release, she would recount her story as a victim, survivor tale, and this would lead to audiences providing support and sympathy rather than disdain and ridicule. She was really smart in that she quickly learned to capitalize on her popularity. She would go on to publish her memoir, appear at public speaking events, and make a nice little living for herself in displaying her bodies and her body and speaking about her experiences. And in seeing the success that Oatman found, other women would later go on and find a similar path in displaying their bodies for profit. So this led to the tattooed ladies of the circuses and sideshows. They were often covered from head to toe with tattoos. This was a relatively quick and affordable way to get in this business and make a pretty good living. There are some reports that show around 1900 that depending on their popularity and the audiences they could bring in, some of these women were earning between $100 and $200 per week. And this is at the same time that teachers were earning about $7 per week. Two particular women of this period who were very popular were Nora Hildebrandt and Irene Woodward. Excuse me. They kind of followed suit from seeing Oatman's success. They actually were tattooed by choice. This was a career move to some degree for them, but they learned that in telling these stories of forced tattooing and captivity and incorporating these wildly fictionalized stories, they could attract an audience, grow their popularity, be more successful, make more money. So while they were able to do this kind of a job, they were fairly financially stable. They had a life of independence. They were able to see and travel, and yet they were never quite able to integrate into society with any type of respectability. They would always still kind of be outsiders. So that ability to be a citizen, even with this level of independence and financial security, was still a struggle. As the sideshows and the circuses really began to wane in popularity, when we get to the 1960s, there comes a pretty significant shift in the popular culture and the perception of tattoos. This typically is thought to come from the public figures such as Janis Joplin and other rock stars who had visible tattoos. This kind of shifted to a more popular or public acceptance of tattoos. Even now in our current modern societies, the tattoo's taken on a new meaning, has shifted. It's no longer considered a form of deviant behavior. It's a relatively socially acceptable choice in many cases. The majority of the scholarship that I was able to find on women and tattoos in general really is focused on kind of our modern perception, understanding, ideas, reactions to tattoos. Very little scholarship could I find specifically on those previous time periods. While there's a significant amount of scholarship that addresses the psychological and sociological aspects of tattoos, there's relatively literal scholarship that focuses on the rhetoric of tattoos and kind of this rhetorical historiography of tattoos. Lastly, it's kind of this idea of living with tattoos today. Initially, this is the part of the project I was most interested in, is speaking with women with various numbers of tattoos who are living and experiencing and interacting with society today. As I progressed with the project, my attention kind of shifted to where I was more interested in Olive Oatman and the tattooed ladies. But I do still think there's some interesting details to come out of the conversations I had with three particular women who are interacting with society, being tattooed today. My friend Katie I spoke with, she considers herself very heavily tattooed. But that has never been a huge problem with her. She was in the military, and that's where she received the majority of her tattoos while she was in the military. She works in a technical career now with a lot of men who are often also heavily tattooed. So she's never kind of felt any issue there. She says she does have most negative experiences and encounters when she's in public, just in her day-to-day interactions at Walmart, at a funeral, or wherever. Hannah is my other friend I spoke with. She considers herself kind of moderately tattooed. Her family has always had a positive or neutral reaction to her tattoos. She said the most negative experience she had with her tattoos was when she was working and teaching high school at a parent-teacher conference. She had a parent that was very vocal of her disapproval of her tattoos and how that would distract or influence her child that was being taught. Lastly, I spoke with Amy. She technically really doesn't consider herself a tattooed person. She's just a woman with a tattoo. She only has one small tattoo. She works in a traditional look career. She has a very conservative family. Typical responses to her tattoos are positive, but she's received very negative experiences, mostly with her family and church, with her mother telling her after she received a tattoo that she was trashy and tacky. So just kind of wrapping up this conversation here, several of the texts we covered this semester could be applicable to further study in this topic. I personally found Hallenbeck's Claiming the Bicycle and Wan's Producing Good Citizens to have the most interesting potential for some connections, some parallels that could be examined. But I also think that the Lone Star rhetorics, the activist rhetorics, and the American by Paper, the ideas of citizenship, and how all of these kind of could tie together with this idea of tattoos and women and being active citizens at different historical periods could really all kind of come together in an interesting way. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
There was this notion, and she talked about the stories that they would make up to sell themselves as, tattooed for various reasons, and the story threads were that they didn't want them, right?
So
that's fascinating.
what are we to make of that?
Well, just spitballing, now haven't read anything from this, just spitballing. I mean, the audience, the paying audience in this time period is probably more male from having the money perspective. So we can infer, and I don't think it's too big a leap to say they wanted to hear stories about women captured and women put in a position where they were permanently altered against their will, which is what these stories, if the scholarship backs that up, and these are the stories they told, and these are the ones that sold well, if we want to talk about it in those terms, then that's what the audience wanted to hear.
They're taking agency by suggesting that they had no agency. Yeah,
absolutely.
The idea of selling yourself in the image of
yes,
as an object.
There's a feeling that this connects to Sophia. Not quite sure. But
it's a short step. If the ultimate end goal for Sophia is the Westworld angle, and to create the ultimate thing to be acted upon, this is the start. Women in the 1800s because a tattoo is done to you. I mean, you can technically do it to yourself if you're skilled, right? But you're doing it upside down, you're doing it backwards. You have a bit of agency in selecting it, but you give it up when the person starts. If they decide, you know what, that red color you want is now purple, what are you going to do? Yeah. It's like halfway through a haircut you decided you didn't want anymore. It's too late. So it's being done to you.
It is.
And the thread in the stories was that they didn't want it, but when you remove that they didn't want it, you get a robot.
Robot who can't want.
I mean, could be programmed to say that's not what they want, but
program humans.
Right? Ooh, oh,
program
see how
what?
easy that was? She said program humans.
That's what we're talking about. That's what rhetoric is programming, right? Capturing identity in ink, the captivities of Olive Oatman. I think she sounds so interesting.
Oh, 4. Okay.
Yeah. So she's looking at drawings, newspaper reports, and broadsides that depict and describe the chin and arm tattoos that she received as a captive in the Mojave as reasons for the mass appeal. And considering Oatman's experience with a literary, historical, cultural context that takes tattooing into account, that reading her narrative in that context allows readers to see her that reflect the threat to white Christian society by experiences of captivity. That is something as well that, if like the bad guys are like marking these poor helpless women, then yeah, let's hear more stories about how awful the Native Americans are, because we really need to keep pushing them into this land. Let's see, she said, reveals about the social reaction to her tattoos and what those reactions imply about the society that she returned to. Directly relates to the project's goal of analyzing how the woman's tattoos influence societies of ideas of whether or not she could be considered a good citizen, or like how she actually harnesses what's available to her to make use of that. See, the tattooed ladies. 50 years as a tattooed lady. The individual agency, rhetorical agency, that Gibbons and other tattooed women possess, the role of an inked body in the circus and sideshow, and how they've evolved over the last 100 years. Emphasizes the positive impact of tattoos in Gibbons' life. She was able to make choices for herself, choices that allowed her to make a stable income, to travel, to express herself freely. Yeah, I mean, she's standing up there with a voice and people are listening to her, even if they're not listening to the things that maybe, she hasn't taken the stage in the ways that this Boy Sets Fire. They knew when they, what else do you do that for? Not to be a jerk. Yeah, to be a jerk. But let's see. Living on the edge of citizenship. And also the question of whether or not they're asking to be accepted, or what acceptance means. Punctured Purity, I love that title. And let's see if there's anything else she'd like us to look at. Revolting Bodies, the Monster Beauty of Tattooed Women. Freak Shows. History of women's tattoos. Throughout recent history, they provide an access point into revolutionary aesthetics for women. The article is divided into 2 main sections. The first, the author examines origins of modern tattooing, the cosmetic tattooing, Victorian women, the ongoing sexualization and degradation of tattooed women by men. That's a good point. Freak show, beauty pageants, tattoo contests. Some women chose to be heavily tattooed in order to travel, circuses. Let's see. The popularity of these tattooed ladies surpassed that of tattooed men, and then those captivity narratives perpetuated. So they presented themselves as victims, but by doing so, they made a life of independence and financial security. They're hypersexualized, scary, threatening, revolutionary women, within a particular context. All right, is there anything else? The Suicide Girls, of course. Yeah, that's something that Kim looked at quite a lot in her project and in her interviews. So yeah, definitely take a look. An American by Paper, how does she tie that one? Yeah, tattoo, women with tattoo, okay. All right, so good stuff. All right, so what shall we look at next? I think Savannah's. She ended up looking at the Atheism and Good Citizenship Project. I'm glad to see that.
For my project, I took a look at the correlation between atheism and good citizenship. So for my poster presentation, I explained some different elements of my project. And I'm going to read my thing explains and then I'm going to explain them for you. So, helping people after a big storm, sticking up for people who are now not allowed to get well at a doctor because of whom they love, making sure all children in school feel like they belong even if they are not the same as the people in power, making sure love is shown to all soldiers who fought in the war instead of just the believers, and trying to get children who do not have a home taken care of are just some of the ways people who do not believe in God are trying to be good people. All of these efforts are not seen by the rest of the world. If they were noticed, then people who do not believe in God would not be so hated and feared by the rest of the world. Maybe one day they will be seen as just as good as the rest of the world despite what they do or do not believe. So for my project, I looked at some different articles that were written by atheist groups, and this encompasses some of those. So helping people after a big storm, that was an article that was about how an atheist group helped rebuild homes and helped people after a hurricane. Sticking up for people who are not allowed to get well at a doctor because of whom they love. That's referring to an article about the new law that says that doctors are allowed to discriminate against transgender people because of their beliefs. So if they don't believe in being transgender because of their religion, then they're allowed to deny service to transgender individuals. And atheists are trying to get that stopped. Making sure all children in school feel like they belong even if they are not the same as the people in power. This is referring to the article about the school in Alabama who was trying to get In God We Trust put in all of the classrooms, even though most of the students who go to that particular school don't believe in God. And having In God We Trust in the classrooms, if you don't believe in God, it makes you feel like you're different than everybody else, like you don't belong, like you're less American than the people in power because you don't believe in the same thing that they do. So atheists are trying to get that stopped so that all children feel welcome in their school environments. Making sure love is shown to all of the soldiers who fought in the war instead of just believers. That's referring to an article about how one way that they're trying to honor the fallen soldiers is by putting a cross up, a 40-foot cross up at their gravesite. And that really only shows honor to the soldiers who were Christian, not the minority religion soldiers, and definitely not the atheist soldiers who fought and died in the same war. So atheists were trying to get them to find a different way to honor the soldiers that includes every single one of them instead of just the Christians. Trying to get children who do not have a home taken care of. That's referring to how currently foster and adoption agencies are allowed to discriminate against non-religious prospective parents based solely on their beliefs. So right now it's extremely difficult for atheist parents to adopt or foster a child because of these laws set in place. So only Christians or other religious groups are able to adopt and foster in America right now because it's so difficult for atheists to adopt a child. So that was what the article was about, and they're trying to get people to sign a petition to reverse this ruling so that all children have an opportunity, because lots of atheist parents want to adopt a child. So the part over here above the Darwin logo, it says, people who do not believe in God are seen as not good people of the world. People who do not believe in God. Atheist is not in the 100 or 1,000 most used words, so that's what I used instead. People who do not believe in God are seen as not good people of the world. They are not the same as the rest, and others fear them. Believers want the world to go as they wish, and people on the outside keep that from happening, so they must be held down and back. So when atheists try and go against what believers want, that makes them it puts a dent in their being able to get power and be able to get the things passed that they want based on their beliefs. So believers want to stop atheists from getting what they want. They want to stop atheists from getting in the way of laws passed based on God, or using God as an excuse to pass these laws. Over here under the atheist experience, I said, people who do not believe in God want the world to know that they want what's best for the earth and all the humans on it, no matter what they believe or whom they love. They do not leave people out because they do not see the world the same way. People who believe sometimes do this and change the meaning of what it means to be a good human. So what I mean by this is that atheists want everybody to be included. They don't want people to be left out based on their beliefs or their sexual orientation or their gender, anything like that. And Christians sometimes do, or people with religions that say certain things based on the Bible often try and exclude those people who go against what the Bible says, and atheists want to include everybody. Also, they want what's best for the earth because the earth is the only place that we have to live. And like atheists don't believe in an afterlife, and there's no place to go when earth is gone. So we want to make sure that the earth is taken care of and that the earth can provide for our children and our children's children, because we don't believe, or atheists don't believe that there's an alternative after the earth is destroyed. So we want to protect the earth and make sure that the earth is okay. And people who do believe, Christians and other religions, often form what a good person is to them based on their religious texts. Atheists believe that to be a good person or a good citizenship, you need to take care of the place that you live and the people that you live with. All people, not just people who have beliefs. So that's what I did for my project. Thank you.
Oh, it got sideways.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the way she's using her phone. So, wow, that's weird.
Oh God! Leave the back of the head. That is terrifying.
Okay, so interesting. So I'm going to pull up her bibliography. Let's see what we've got here. Just identity and what makes a good citizen. Okay, so I'm going to look at a couple of places. She's using Producing Good Citizens. She told the story about the crosses in the schools. Atheist Labor Department rules allowing religious discrimination are disgusting, un-American. Atheist.org. 5 reasons to come out to see at the schools. Okay, and then she ties that into. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of just mention of atheists. That's interesting. And the Boy Scouts, that's interesting too. I think didn't they just cut that requirement about. Okay, so I did a quick Google Scholar search on atheism. This paper reports rhetorical aftermath discovered when pressure groups consistently failed to achieve its end. The rhetoric examined is that of the popular atheists in the United States. Psychologically speaking, ostracism seems to cause such problems. Blah, blah, blah. So this is a quarterly journal speech. Negative theology, atheist as other, moral boundaries and cultural membership in American society. These would be really good sources for atheism functions in American discourse. And so one research question that one could undertake if one was looking at atheism as a rhetorical historiography would be to take a site like this Atheist Experience that she mentioned, Atheist Community of Austin. It's a very active one. So we've got a couple others we're going to go through, and I just wanted to say, while off camera, I'm not going to touch this. I pulled up a couple of, to pursue this as a rhetorical historiography, I would suggest to look at some sources that look specifically at atheism and rhetoric. For example, you had suggested, I do like this, the idea of approaching the Atheist Experience TV show, Happy Without God, a couple of episodes or a few themes, as an archive, and then doing a rhetorical historiography about the ways in which they work through, these are rhetorical interventions into the ways in which people understand people who do not believe in God in a country that where the commonplace assumption is that without God there can be no morality. So you're looking at these cases which are very interesting, where one erects a large cross at the grave sites of people who don't believe in God, or at least don't believe in a Christian God, as an injustice, where the people who are erecting the cross, I assume, maybe they're righting a wrong, as removing the agency of the fallen soldier, in the same ways that they're removing the agency of the potential adopted parents by suggesting that because the assumption is that one can't have morality without having a belief in a Christian God, that person can't be a good adopted parent. I'll say one more thing, and I'll ask Brian to say again what he said before, if you don't mind. We're working, if we're treating this as a rhetorical project rather than a political project, I would suggest that any rhetorical project has political implications. But if we start first with it as a rhetorical project, then our assumption is not that our job is to make the argument that that atheists can be good people, but to look at strong examples of people who have made arguments that atheists are good people, and the moves that they make rhetorically to make such arguments. And I would suggest that one way one does that is by looking at rhetorical interventions that attempt to decouple the idea that morality is reliant 100% and always and only on a belief in God and a Christian God. And I told an example of my family's very, very Catholic, and I multiple generations of it. My grandmother, who's very kind, very loving, very curious about everyone, and never confrontational about everyone, met somebody who described himself as a Buddhist. She wanted to know everything about him until he said that, and then she said, "So, but how do you know what's right?" Seems like a good guy, I don't know. But that was the first time I'd ever heard or really understood that assumption that it is impossible as a human being to traverse the world with good moral intentions without God, which makes sense from a perspective of a person of faith. That's not me, but from a perspective of a person of faith, because that's what, for example, the Bible's about. Is about morality and a moral compass. So these things have an uneasy alliance at best, even if we are able to actually have a conversation.
But rhetorically, this is a fascinating archive. What are they trying to do, and to what end? They're trying to suggest that one can be happy without God, that one can be moral without God, that one can be good without God. And that is a remaking of people's understanding of that. And so that said, Brian had a really good suggestion for a way to frame a project like this.
But there's such a fragility to that. To have a religion and be so threatened by the fact that someone would disagree, that, right?
Well, it's confusing.
Separate from your morality discussion, but just the previously with the assumption that atheists are bad people from the poster, and the assumption that they can't do good work, and that they're somehow threatening. That has more to do with the person's like if you're a person of faith, that should not be shaken so easily by the fact that somebody has either a different one or none.
Well, I would think so. And it's also confusing because if one believes that morality is not possible, I mean, literally impossible without a belief in a Christian God, then they might think that they are serving the world by forcing this perspective. So if and we're going back to one thing we mentioned off camera was that the Mormons' longtime project to I guess baptize people who have died without a religion or with, I'm not exactly sure how it works, so that they can save them. You know, this is like an altruistic. They believe there is one path. Anybody who's a strong believer, my family, there is a path, and in a lot of these religions, you don't go down this path, then, eternal fires of damnation. So I'm trying to help you, or I'm trying to keep kids out of your hands because I don't think it's possible for you to be moral. I love you, you're great, but I don't think you can be moral unless you have a God. That's what my grandmother believed. She liked this guy she was sitting across from, but she didn't see how she was literally flummoxed by how he could possibly know what was right if he didn't have God. So I mean, I don't know that it's fragility necessarily. It's just like it's the power of the commonplace. How could one possibly be threatened by a strong woman? For example, why is your manhood so fragile? We say to guys, still, but definitely then. I don't know. I mean, I just think things mean one thing. You're telling me they mean another thing. Stop telling me that thing. so, but the articulation theory.
Sure. The last article on my bib is by a guy named Greg Wilson. It's called "Arguing for Torture: Using Articulation Theory to Understand George W. Bush's Military Commission Speech." And the abbreviated version is it traces the language and the pitch of torture, what we would refer to and correctly as torture, but enhanced to interrogation. And this theory is used to take, it's in a nutshell, the ends justify the means, but it's a link between the desire, which was the information we wanted from captives, and the means that we would get it, which is torture. And the author's purpose in this article is to show a link between this theory and what they were calling moral arguments. So if you take this notion that we weren't torturing Christians, right? We were torturing other religions, and the only way to get through was to torture them. So and to tie it, obviously now we can do it. I mean, if they're things, it's easier to torture them, isn't it?
It's othering and making them, yeah, for sure. And I think that goes to Katrina's project too. That these African Americans, former slaves in the Jim Crow, Forney, I think she was looking at when we talk about them in the papers. They're things. They're things without agency. So yeah, interesting. So articulation theory I think is really an interesting. I love that. We're constructing what a moral human is and does and needs and requires.
And there's like a rightness to it then. Like
that's it.
That was the pitch, right? It was
necessary.
But it was the only way. Despite mountains of evidence, long-standing mountains of evidence that everything we were going to do was going to produce false reports, anything to get the thing to stop. But this was correct. We still had to do it. And that's that us versus them, post 9/11 attitude. There's that
That's your
Isaac
project.
piece again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Yeah, the othering. That is definitely citizenship rhetoric, right? There has to be a not us. And you try to say, no, I'm a us. You know, I have morals. I promise you. Look what the good things we're doing, man. Doing so many good things. And they're also, I mean, another side of this might be a really interesting look. And I think there are some new atheists and same old Islamophobia. I can just guess who we're talking about here. But that's one of the things that might be part of the story is those is the most outspoken atheists who are kind of fundamentalist atheists. I suggest that, you know, they're threatened by anybody believing in God. How dare you? Yeah.
Should put that bad religion logo on the poster.
I should.
Just a cross with a big no sign on it.
Let's see. Okay, so Kendall says, I'm just a little annoyed, just like Sarah, that Spotify stops recording at 10 minutes. Apologize for the abrupt ending. It's a project started, as I said, with the archival documents sent to the Barnett family. But I'm struggling with narrowing down the topic, of course, because each piece of this affects the next. So true, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want you to narrow, just open it up. That's your permission. It's really interesting to look at the materials here in a different way than I had in the past and continue the research in a different direction. Because I was looking at the archives, interviews, and documents in a different way, which is kind of what Lisa was doing. She's a genealogist and she does local history, and so she's looking at, you know, what these things mean regarding like the history of this area, instead of looking at the ways rhetorically they are framing the things that they're talking about. So the new research informed not only this project but others that I've done and still working on the future. I hope to continue this project in the future because it is something that interests me and I believe deserves more attention. The struggle with narrowing the topic is that this can go in so many different directions. If we just consider the code of conduct change in the military and the way the military creates good soldiers, that by itself I think is so interesting. How does the military create good soldiers, and the change in code of conduct change is just, that is rhetorical, only rhetorical. I mean, literally and only rhetorical. There's no it there except to rhetorically shift the dynamics of what good soldiers mean. Another avenue is to look at the identity of those who have come back from Korean War and dedicated their lives to educating others on the truth of the POW camps. So that might be, again, a rhetorical intervention that these Korean soldiers are trying to do into the ways in which people understand the POW camps and the Korean War, and as much as anybody thinks about them at all. So, you know, that untold story, that invisibility that they're trying to intervene in. Or those who didn't make it home from war and yet their identity is shaped by the negative media perception given of those who were taken prisoner in the war. I like people who don't get captured. I could go on forever here, and there's so many different directions. However, I hope that I was able to record enough detail to make my intentions for this project clear. The last thing I've tried to say is that there are several institutions that are creating space not only for those who fought in the war, but for those who were citizens and affected by the war to record their narrative. That's true in our various oral histories on the war in our university library. They're looking at both those who experienced the war overseas and those who lived stateside and were affected by the war that way. By the wars, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, World War II. And,
Hello, my final project is based on POW and MIA Korean War veterans and identity with policy change. In Inventing Place, Writing Lone Star Rhetorics, each essay author argues that being from a certain place gives you an identity and a community that others may not understand from the outside looking in. Considering places and often time periods as archives, these authors ask, can individuals' identities be shaped simply by being there in a certain place? In the proposed project, I examine the ways in which veterans of the Korean War may have shared a place that shaped their identity, for better or worse. Through personal interviews, texts, and family update meetings, veterans and their families have been provided a space to gain rhetorical agency necessary for education and closure. The following annotated bibliography outlines the facets for the proposed rhetorical historiography by pulling together existing publications, offering insight into various aspects of the following questions. So my research questions are, how are Korean War veterans' identities shaped by their experience and reception as well as reputation upon coming home? What information and/or peace of mind can government documents provide for the families of POW MIA veterans from the Korean War, with or without their loved ones' remains? With this in mind, I'll focus attention on the themes like being there and rhetorical histories of those from the Korean War. With the support of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency and Korean War Veterans Association National Director and POW MIA Coordinator, I have been able to interview Korean War veterans and their family members. The stories shared in interviews, combined with scholarly work which comments on the subject sheds light on the questions at hand. Ultimately, the proposed rhetorical historiography traces the ways in which POW and MIA veterans of the Korean War create identity within their group, as well as marking a change in military procedures which create good soldiers, similar to good citizens in Wayne's Good Citizens Literacy Training in Ancient Times. However, at this stage, I will not limit my search to POW and MIA veterans, but broaden the field to all Korean War veterans and their families in order to understand how identities have been shaped and future good soldiers are made. In particular, I will consider government documents mailed home to loved ones of fallen KW soldiers who have not returned home to be buried, and how things construct meaning and shape identity, especially with respect to their relationship to and with other things, for example, policy changes, and to places and materiality in circulation. Let's take a look at the poster. It's titled Finding Identity and Closure, POW and MIA Life After the Korean War. At the top here, I have their research questions. The second question says, what information and/or peace of mind can government documents provide for the families of POW and MIA veterans from the Korean War with or without their loved ones' remains? The reason for this, I was hoping to include an archive that kind of stemmed this entire project, or like made me start thinking about it in this way at least. And it is a map that is possibly a burial map and a death certificate from one of the family members that I've spoken to, his name is Sergeant Barnett, and he was originally MIA, and they were given a birth certificate, a death certificate, and then they were given another death certificate when they realized he had actually passed on in a POW camp. I chose not to include those documents here because of fear of putting it on the internet when the information is not mine, although I've been told I can share these things throughout for my presentations and things, but I didn't feel comfortable putting it on here. However, that's where it stems from, and some of the interesting part of that has been that family was not given information and an understanding of what the map is, and I have asked various people along my route through these interviews, including the president of the DPAA, to try and figure out what exactly this map is and what information it can provide for the family, whether it was, I've been told it could be a burial map, and it could be a place marker of where he's buried in Korea. It could have been a map to show the directions that the troops were in. It also could have been a map of POW camps, and not necessarily where he was buried, but where the POW camp was that he passed away in. And that's kind of what stemmed my interest here of this one piece of paper taken to several different people, whether it be teachers, other veterans, DPAA, president, people like that, that should have information and understanding of what this document is, and I get a different answer every time I present the information. And not only that, the family was not given any information in regard to the map and any way to understand what that document was or how it could provide any type of closure for them, because unfortunately they are one of the many families that are still waiting on their loved ones' remains to be brought home. So with that in mind, the materials and methods, as I said, I've been able to interview several family members as well as veterans themselves, one of which was a prisoner of war and who came home. That story is really interesting. Several times a year, the DPAA holds family update meetings in various cities throughout the United States to provide more information for those families still waiting for the remains of their loved ones. The DPAA is working tirelessly to find the remains of those lost in order to bring them home. And I've been fortunate enough to go to a few of these meetings and be able to meet some of the family members and talk through what this means for them and how this has changed the identity, how the war and the reception of the veterans and other things included in the research question, how that has shaped the identity of their loved one, even though they've passed on and have not been brought home yet. In the ongoing work section, as I said, they're working hard to bring them home. And then there are veterans such as Ollie and Rowley, which I will explain in a second. They continue to educate others by means of conferences, speeches, and text about the facts of POW camps and situations with MIA veterans, because the media as well as other sources have skewed what they feel is the truth of the Korean War POW camps. At the bottom here, we have many family members who have lost loved ones will pass on before their loved ones' remains will be brought home. However, the identity of those veterans, as well as the others who have already come home, is shaped but not defined by their time in the Korean War, a time that should be remembered as a sacrifice for freedom. And in the center here for the background, I just give a little background of a few of the veterans I've spoken to and family members just to give a little insight. Arden Rowley, Murray Barnett, and William Ollie are just a few veterans among the brave men who served in the Korean War. They were trained and shipped off to Korea to fight for peace, and they did so without a second thought. Arden Rowley spent 33 months in a POW camp and came home to tell his story. Murray Barnett was taken captive in a POW camp and died of blood poisoning due to lack of medical attention in a prisoner of war camp. The Korean War brought about concern for the military, as many were indoctrinated and tortured in POW camps. Media coverage, literature, and films regarding the Korean War present differently than those of other wars, and veterans of the Korean War have not routinely been afforded the same recognition and compassion as those veterans in other wars. These soldiers, as well as many others, deserve the same recognition that any other war veteran obtains. Individuals such as Ollie and Rowley have dedicated much of their life since returning home to educating others on the truth about the war in POW camps. Barnett, however, never made it home, and his family to this day has no remains to bury. Upon Barnett's death, the military sent home documents, and that's what I was discussing earlier. And then this picture down here is of William Ollie, and this is a picture that was sent home to his family when he was basically saved from the prisoner of war camp before he was sent home. Conclusions: the experiences in the Korean War not only changed military policies for future conflicts, but it changed the lives of those who returned and those whose return we await. Each Korean War veteran has an identity connected to this war. However, it is the job of those whose freedom was protected to protect their legacy. I think that's an important aspect of this entire project and previous projects I've done with these interviews and ongoing project with these interviews. But this project allowed me to find even more information and dive deeper into other people, not only veterans, but civilians in Korea who experienced identity shifts within this and who belong to a community. And it's been interesting to look at this project from a different aspect of the archives, whether that be the interview or the paper sent home to Mr. Barnett's family. As information develops and like understanding those documents and looking at those archives from that aspect of creating identity and creating a community, and especially that identity, like I said, once they've come home, and that negative connotation that is built around Korean War veterans and being brainwashed and all the research there. It's been interesting to look at it from a different aspect of archival research rather than just interviews and storytelling, but to look at the veterans and to look at citizens of those villages and to hear their stories and understand how their identity has been shaped and changed. And a lot of not only the veterans, but the citizens haven't had a chance. They don't have a place to voice these narratives, but there are several
Okay. Well, there are several you'll never know.
So yeah, okay. I'm gonna just draw up super quickly. I know we're. Let's see. She's pulled a couple of her sources here. Oh, she added it later. While this downloads, I heard a podcast
from a woman who lost her husband in the towers in 9/11. And I'm thinking about the rhetoric of closure and the policy decisions that determine or shape closure or don't allow closure. Yeah, the everyday things. The fact that this document is, that map is just, what the heck? In every word but one, bodily matters, so some public historian ones. I'm going to do a quick search with that because we've got some. I don't really have much of an understanding of the Korean War from popular culture. It doesn't seem to deal as much with it as it does with all the other world wars.
Yes. Do you have any idea why that is? I mean, like, I know Vietnam has the rep for being the war that sparked the pop culture pushback to it. But yeah, I don't. Was there anything at the time of the Korean War?
It's representative of the movies and things.
The Korean War?
No, the Vietnam.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, Korean. I don't know.
You know, that's, I mean, just the invisibility is really interesting. And I, the only thing I can think of is MASH, which was actually happening during the Vietnam War and after, but set, the movie was set during the Vietnam War, but this one was set during the Korean War. And when Claire comes back and he's like, you know, it really was a war, folks. I know you're not thinking it, but it totally was. So basically, you know, I don't know what you thought we were doing over there, but we were doing something. You know, life just went on because I guess because it's sandwiched between World War II was like everybody's glorious, and, you know, and everybody was, I mean, I guess again, because it happened on our soil. I don't know. World War I, that's different. I understand, not lauded in the ways World War II ones were. My grandmother told me that her dad told her never get near a World War I vet. That guy's crazy. Anyway.
That All Quiet on the Western Front era in the destruction of the people who were involved.
That's the birth of modernism for sure.
Yeah, so that's the rep. Like, they've all got their reps, but that one has no.
Correct, and its lack of rep is really interesting rhetorically. Yeah. So I'm thinking like, I think she starts something really interesting, and I love especially the military policy decisions and the ways those. So I was thinking of something like rhetorical historiography about military policy decisions regarding documentation and the notification of loved ones following MIA soldiers fallen in wartime, especially, we don't know, MIA soldiers, we don't know what they've done, specifically the Korean War. And I will, I did a Google search for Korean War rhetoric, but a 9/11 example, this woman, she lived in the South, her husband went away to a job. He was in the towers when they went down. She talks about not knowing, but the main thing was the decisions regarding their recovery project. They found and identified over years. She knows nothing, she knows nothing, she knows nothing. And then all of a sudden they send her a small baggie, which she doesn't know what it is, but she knows that it's her husband, and they ceremoniously go and take it, and she's out there with her sister, and they're laughing because some of it flies in their face, and so they do a whole thing with their friends, and she mourns, and it's powerful and it's meaningful. Closure in as much as there's closure. And then another bag of more of her husband comes. And so what do we do now? She finally said, just stop. Whatever's left, just stop. So the decisions that they were making in terms of the recovery efforts, they were attempting, I'm sure, to do something that was kind and loving, but they were sort of freaking her out.
and disrupting her ability to offer closure. And in the weird policy decisions that it sounds like they missed the mark in sending this map of what the heck is it? Where's my husband? Where's my dad? And this is what, 50 years later, right? And they're still waiting for some information. And so this organization's rhetorical interventions into the ways in which maybe also forcing new policy decisions that would not be so empty and confusing for loved ones. Like, I didn't quite understand how this map showed up in their hands, but not knowing what that is, that's sort of a problem. Not only do they not know where they are, they don't know what the heck these materials are telling them about where they might be. The romantic rhetoric of Korean reunification. Oh, that's Asian studies. So yeah, what does the Korean War mean for America? Okay, last one. I don't have a video for this one, so I'm just going to walk it through quickly. But Abigail has. And Katrina's will show up later, so I hope you guys will look for that. But Abigail has her project, not recording, but there's her annotated bibliography is there, and her PowerPoint, which is lovely. I won't read all of it, but just New Orleans street names. Historiography outline. Okay, so yeah, New Orleans history. She said that the street name debate in Kansas City is what drew her interest into looking at these New Orleans street names. And she's got some. Let's see. There's one street in particular. Examples. Okay. Analyze the street names of New Orleans' most historic streets for the purpose of identifying the people and their impact on their area. The French. Hypothesis is the French remain in influence because of their assimilation or vice versa with local people. I will, these are interesting sources. Let's see. Okay, the residents notice the location in relation to the Orleans and Jefferson parishes. Creoles in relation to the Orleans and Jefferson parishes. The names in French or English in origin: Emma, Emily, Michael, Joshua, etc. And that's it. Okay, I'll just open up her annotated bibliography. She says that I'm going to find that article that she mentioned about the Kansas. Really quickly. I can't find it, but her inspiration was a rhetorical study of the fight that they had in terms of naming these streets two streets in Kansas City. And so, as I understood it, her rhetorical historiography was to look at streets that she understood were controversial experience, and naming these particular streets as being controversial, and what that fight might have been about in terms of, so a rhetorical historiography could look at a series of documents, including newspaper articles maybe, and I don't know, government archives, minutes from city meetings, community members standing up, and pamphlets maybe that were pushing against for one naming of in a town over another. So yeah, that's in terms of that's one of the challenges of looking at something in terms of rhetoric versus history. Historically, we probably are interested in the ways in which these things actually happened, and the meaning that they might take, and how they might help us understand the ways in which different immigrants have made an impact on a particular region. And that is interesting to rhetoricians, but interesting more
potential for rhetorical historiography is to understand how those things came to mean, not just in terms of the bodies that come in, but who has power over those spaces to do the naming and how that naming comes about and what one thinks is the meaning of particular streets. You know, how do things, we've had controversies even recently about signs that people want to rename a road. Maybe to even get something on the ballot is a hugely rhetorical move. You know, I want this street to be Cesar Chavez Street. That has to happen at a particular moment, and they have to get a number of signatures, and they have to make particular arguments why that particular street should be this name and not another one. And Malcolm X Boulevard, for example, and these kinds of things. So those streets, maybe they were named somebody else, and renaming those streets can provoke a challenge. I mean, it's along the same lines as the Confederate monuments and attempting to replace those. The very idea of taking down a building as iconic as the building's name, I've forgotten, it's so iconic, it's gone in Dallas. But that forced a change in Dallas city policy regarding businesses. It was the Dr. Pepper building. I was looking at the Dublin Dr. Pepper documentary. And Dr. Pepper company who owned that building and that land sold it to Kroger, and Kroger got rid of the building. They owned it, but the city didn't have a policy for taking care of historical landmarks. So that could be a rhetorical historiography that looked at, our beloved institution, Dr. Pepper, and the fight with the big man was small. That's definitely a rhetorical study too. The Dublin Dr. Pepper debacle, those poor little guys. Anyway, okay. So we'll wait for Katrina's, look for that. These are really interesting projects. If you do pursue them, and I hope you will, I'm happy to help. I do like that these are open-ended. I think that our conversations will suggest that these can go even, new directions, or I love the directions you're taking them. I love the idea of going multiple directions. I'm happy to talk about these at any point, and I hope you'll talk to others about it. And as you guys go back here and look at each other's projects, and if you have ideas about other things that they might include, ideas they might bring in, then I hope you'll toss those forward as well. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. That's a wrap.